Hi. Now we come to a moral law about fidelity, faithfulness, and it has to do with marriage, and not just marriage, but sex and love and marriage and the good. How do those all relate? Well, let's think about this for a second. What is love? Have we talked about love yet? I don't think we have. The Greeks have different senses of love. I'll tell you about 4 senses of love. I think I have talked about this somewhere. The first is eros, and that's romantic love. But not just romantic love, but a kind of passion. I talk about eros in pursuit of the good, that you should pursue the good as if it is your significant other, as if it's your love. But they also talk about agape. Agape is like love for the unlovable. It's, I love you even when you're being like that. You know what I mean? It's the love parents have for teenagers. It's the love that God has for humans when humans are being like that. There's another kind of love, phileo. Phileo is like brotherly love. It's based on friendship. Phileo love, like Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And then there's storge. Storge is familiar, natural affection, like I love my dog. So we say things like, I love my dog, I love my jeans, I love my car, I love my country, I love my mom, I love my husband. But that love is different in each one, right? So love of husband could be sometimes eros, sometimes agape, sometimes both. Hopefully friendship in there too. Love for your dog is probably storge. Love for your favorite jeans, storge. I love my iPhone, storge. So we need to recognize we use this word love a lot, but what do we mean by it? Now, we want to talk about marriage too. Now, why are we talking about marriage? Well, we're going to talk about the origin of our being. Remember, we're looking for a moral law that's based on human nature. Can we make this a universal moral principle? So let's talk about the origin of our being. It's time to talk about the birds and the bees, kids. All right, so the origin of our being is from a sexual union of our parents. Is that true? Through the nurture of our being by our parents, the good is achieved. So notice, the origin of our being, sexual union. So that brings sexuality, sex into the moral discussion. And the nurture of our being. Nurture having to do with the growth of our being, the development of our being. It's an ongoing process for humans. We don't just grow in like 2 years like an animal might. I don't know, maybe even less than 2 years. I'm thinking of puppies. Human beings take a long time to develop. By the time you're 18, maybe you're ready to, start adulting. So, is this true that the origin of our being is from a sexual union of our parents? Is that a universal? And through the nurture of our being by our parents, the good is achieved. Now, this is going to have implications for family. Notice it has to do with parents, family, and how the good is achieved. So we want the good. Remember, we talked about being born ignorant. We need to be taught the good. We've talked about institutions, and the first institution we're born into is our family. So we want to talk about marriage because ordinarily that's where children are raised, in a family where there's marriage. Now, this isn't a universal that everyone's married, but it is a universal that we come from a sexual union. So let's talk about how those are connected and why those are connected, because sometimes people wonder, should I get married? What's the purpose of marriage? Sometimes we get cynical about marriage. We think, it's a tax break at best because most marriages end up in divorce. We've talked about how to prevent divorce when we've talked about integrity and taking a vow, but this is another way to prevent divorce and the fallout of divorce and the brokenness of the family. So remember, we talked about the institutions of culture are broken. Well, the family's broken too. And it may be because we don't understand the purpose of marriage and the purpose of family. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about the nature of sex and love and marriage and the good and the connection between those. Do sex and love go together? Should they? Now you're going to laugh and say, no, they don't. But should they? Let's see why they should. Sex is a sign and seal of love. I know what you're thinking. No, it's not. Well, when you love someone in that way, you want to be united with them, body and soul. That's what sex and love, when they go together, are, a unity. So the physical union is a natural sign of a spiritual union. We don't always put those together, though. We separate sex and love. And when we do that, it's desecrated. We call it the F word, right? So we desecrate the union when we divorce sex from love. We do it all the time, right? But we shouldn't think it's the same thing. So the physical union is a natural sign of a spiritual union, two people. A physical and spiritual union together is a full union. A full union is a union of persons. And remember, people are complex. We have a body and a soul. We have male and female. We have presuppositions, personalities, backgrounds, uniqueness, mood. All of that comes together in being united with another person. So we have human dignity and we have complexity coming together. A full union of two persons is something that should be monogamous and lasting. Now, why monogamous? Monogamous means staying with one person. Why, though? Because you can't be fully united to more than one person at one time, and if you think about it, over time too. You lose something of yourself when you divorce yourself from uniting with another person. So a full union of two persons is monogamous and lasting. So there's unity and continuity in that kind of relationship. Love in marriage seeks the good. A full union is the union of marriage. Duh, right? So this monogamous and lasting relationship is what we call marriage. And marriage is meant to last. That's why we take vows. Till death do us part. Now, this is the part I was just getting to. Love in marriage seeks the good for and with the other person and for those we bring into being. So let's think about seeking the good for another person. That's what love is. So when we talked about eros, agape, phileo, storge, the Greeks have 4 different kinds of love, but the thing they all have in common is that they all seek the good for the thing that we love. So I love my dog, I seek the good for my dog. I treat him as a dog would need to be treated, not as a person. I seek the good for my husband. So love seeks the good for and with the other. So I could seek the good for my fellow human being. I could seek the good for everyone. But I don't love everyone the same way as I love, say, my husband or the dog. So we seek the good for and with the other in marriage and for those we bring into being, our children. And not everyone has physical children. I don't have physical children, but I do have people in my life who are like my children, some of my students, right? So I do love those people I nurture in the same way, right? I have to help them come to maturity spiritually, philosophically, intellectually, and physically. Luckily, though, I don't have to do much of the physical part. Your parents have done that. So love seeks the good for the other, with the other, and for those we bring into being. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's not always the case, and that's true. That's the brokenness of the reality in which we live. And that's why we need a moral law, so that we could overcome that brokenness by doing the right thing. So the moral law is like a virtue, virtues that show us how to do the right thing. Love is a virtue that seeks the good for the other. Okay, so here's a law on marriage and the good. See if you want to make this a universal. Marriage, the purpose of marriage is to achieve the good. So it's for the good. Marriage isn't for me, for companionship, to make me feel good. Marriage is to achieve the good. And we can talk about an order for marriage that protects a person from the heartache and pain of going through a broken marriage. Now, we can't guarantee it, but we can have wisdom in this area of life. Wouldn't you like wisdom in who you should marry? So there's an order for marriage that protects it. And does marriage need to be protected? I think it does. Death in relationships is due to moral evil, the failure to seek the good for oneself. So if we don't seek the good for ourselves, we're going to have breakdown in every institution and in the institution of marriage as well. And maybe you're cynical about marriage because you've already seen this breakdown. We've all suffered from the effects of divorce. All right, so how can we have an order that protects marriage? Let me see. I'm looking at the handout here. All right, first let's talk about friendship. We should begin with friendship. Should you first be friends with somebody before you marry them? What is friendship? This is also a topic that philosophers in the past have really spent some time on, considering the nature of friendship. Do you have friends? Should marriage be based on friendship? So let's think about friendship. Sometimes students get upset talking about this because they disagree with me, and that's fine. I invite disagreement, remember? So friendship is reciprocal. It goes both ways. It's not a one-way street. It's not like I'm friends with Bono. You probably don't even know who Bono is, right? Google it. He was one of my favorite rock stars. We got divorced. All right, so friendship is reciprocal. It goes both ways. It's lasting. So if you had friends before, you'll have them in the future. And friendship shares the deepest concerns. This is maybe the heart of friendship, sharing the deepest concerns in a mutual way. So it's the effect of the mutual commitment to the good. So friends are those who share the deepest concerns, and those deepest concerns are about the good. So think about that. Can you talk to your friends about the good? Do you share a commitment to the good? And if not, what do you do? Well, then you start seeking the good and discover those around you who are also seeking the good. Friends are discovered that way. You have your eyes on the good. They have their eyes on the good. You look over and you're like, hey, you too? Me too. So friendship. Socrates thought friendship was one of the most difficult and valuable relationships to attain, because it's hard to find someone who's mutually committed to the good, but it also is the most valuable. And I can say it is. I have a few friends, and they're the best because they help you to grow in the good. They help you to engage in the human project. You're like a team working together when you have friends. All right, so friendship comes first, and marriage should be based upon friendship. Should you marry someone you don't share the good with? That would be terrible. Think about it. So marriage, as lasting, must be based on friendship. Why? Because friendship is lasting. It's a lasting relationship. The good of friendship, though, is not the good of romantic love, where we put the other person as the good. Sometimes we think that person is the good, and we pursue them as if they were the good. That's going to be problematic because they're going to feel that pressure. The good is the thing that ultimately satisfies, and if you put a person in the place of the good, they're not going to be able to satisfy you, and they'll feel that, and they'll be probably freaked out, scared away. So don't put a person on a pedestal and worship them. It's not going to work. All right. Now let's talk about what happens when we separate sex and love. It does seem like I'm missing. I was talking about the order. Oh, it's coming up. It's coming up. All right. A person. What is a person? It's a unity of body and soul. We've talked about that. And we shouldn't separate the physical from the spiritual. Can you separate your soul from an activity that you do? Or is the self the one that's doing the activity? So, activities that we do affects the soul. So sex without love is desecrated. The sign without the reality is contemptible. It loses its meaning. We could have meaningless sex when we divorce sex from love. And when it becomes meaningless, it's not satisfying anymore. And if it's not satisfying, this is the area where a lot of people go into excess. Respect of personhood. Remember human dignity that we went over recently? Respect for personhood is opposed to casual sex, where we treat the other person as an object. It's opposed to prostitution, where we pay for pleasure, and pleasure is not the good, and we dehumanize ourselves and the prostitute. It's opposed to rape, where we take the activity from another, we dehumanize that person. And it's opposed to pedophilia, where we dehumanize children for the sake of our own pleasure. And anything that depersonalizes sex is dehumanizing. And it harms ourselves as well as others. So here's morality applied to sex. Anytime we divorce sex from love, it's meaningless, it harms ourselves, it objectifies others. Okay, but you could disagree with me. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to see it in writing. What about polygamy? Oh, this is a funny story. I was once teaching a high school class about the moral law, and we were talking about polygamy, and we were working out the logic of polygamy on the board in the classroom. And so polygamy is where a man could marry more than one wife. And usually it's the man. And it could be maybe 4 wives. So I was drawing pictures on the board. I had a guy with 4 wives. And we were asking about why can only the guy marry many? Why can't the woman also marry many? So then we started to give these wives 4 husbands. And we started working it out. If we think about the logic of polygamy, many spouses, then everyone could marry everyone, and we lose the meaning of marriage altogether. So, the full union of marriage is opposed to polygamy, where we give ourselves partially to many people. And this is also serial relationships. What do you want to call it? Serial monogamy. One relationship to the next. Can you really give yourself fully to many people? All right, let's go back to this concept of marriage. Marriage as lasting is opposed to divorce, where we break our vow. Remember the third topic we talked about, integrity. But sometimes divorce is warranted. Someone may commit adultery, and in committing adultery, they broke the unity of the marriage. That person should be the guilty party. Or sometimes people leave their spouse. It's called willful desertion, and sometimes there's no way to remedy this. So adultery and willful desertion are cause for divorce because that person has broken the union. Okay, let's talk about marriage a little bit more. Sometimes people get married so that they can have children and they make children the good, or they get married so they can have companions and they make companionship the good. But that won't last. So the reason marriages don't last often is because we first haven't understood what the good is. So let's talk about how we can get an order for marriage that protects the marriage. And it starts with, first, seek the good for yourself. Okay? You have to love yourself if you're going to love another. And you have to love God if God exists. So seek the good for yourself, love of yourself, and love of what is the origin of yourself. Then you have to seek the good for the other. You have to know how to seek the good for other people. This is love of neighbor. Do you know how to love your neighbor? And then we have seeking the good with others, as in friendship. And it's within the context of friendship that you might find your complement. So let's say you find that special one. My professor talked about the zing factor. It's like this magical thing that happens when they're in the room. It's attraction, right? It's not just any friend. It's a friend that you're attracted to. And so then you might start a courtship with that person where you have a relationship that's with the intention of seeing whether they would be compatible for you for marriage. And then there's preparation for marriage. Should people prepare for marriage? Should they think about whether they're ready for marriage? Maybe like premarital counseling, where someone tells them what it's like to be married and they go over the vows. Do you understand the meaning of these vows? What does for better and for worse mean? What does in sickness and health mean? What does for richer and poorer mean? So it seems like you should be prepared. And do you know how to be responsible? Can you support a family? Can you support yourselves? Can you support a family? Do you have an income? So there's realities people have to face before they get married. And it seems like that's part of preparation for marriage. People should think about the future and prepare their lives that way. Am I preparing my life for marriage, if that's a goal that I have? And then there are the vows themselves and the commitment and the do I have what it takes to keep the vows? So this is the most thoughtful thing you can do is take a vow. And so have you thought about whether you are able, willing, ready, capable of taking a vow? What proof do you have? And then the last thing that will protect marriage is civil laws. Now, right now, we have no fault divorce, and anybody could leave the marriage for any reason. But perhaps we could have something like a covenant marriage. And a covenant marriage, at least in Arizona, is where you have to have counseling before you get married. And if you're going to get divorced, it has to be for a significant reason, like adultery or willful forsaking of the marriage, or maybe abuse or drug abuse. But you have to have counseling on the way out as well. You can't just get a divorce. You have to have counseling before you get a divorce. So that's one way to protect. Another is that you can both have a prenuptial agreement together. What about that? And the prenuptial agreement could be like this. Whoever leaves the marriage leaves with nothing. It's as if you died. When you die, you don't take the kids, you don't take the house, you don't take half the house. So perhaps both parties can make a prenuptial agreement, a legal binding agreement before they get married as a protection against casual leaving of the marriage, right? So these are ways that people could protect marriage. Seek the good for yourself. Seek the good for others. Seek the good with others. Find your complement. Get prepared and take your vows seriously, and think about laws that are there to protect even if we can't keep our vows, because people are fallible, right? People change. There's all kinds of things that come up. So protect marriage. And if we protect marriage, then perhaps it won't be as broken of an institution as it is now. All right, let's talk about consequences now. The consequences: ordinary infidelity, cheating, adultery, is rooted in infidelity to the good. So if we're not committed to the good, we'll not be committed to the other person. And commitment to the good is a lifelong process. But the other side is marriage for the good increases the good in one's own life and in the lives of others through generations. So think about having children. Think about having community that you're part of. So if you increase the marriage in your own life and in the life of your children, their grandchildren, it will go through the generations. So marriage is an opportunity to increase the good. All right, so I hope you have a better view of marriage after going through this, and hopefulness about the possibility of finding someone who is your friend, who is mutually committed to the good, and who is your complement. It happened for me. Let me just say, it happened. I'll tell you the story someday. All right, next time we're going to talk about value and talent. This is where we talk about your contribution to the human project. All right, take care for now.